Even in a room of experts, I'll put up 2 pictures of the ocean. From the viewpoint of someone standing on a beach. And one of those pictures is in a place where the fisheries have all collapsed and there's pollution and it's not a great environment. The other picture is one of the most pristine places on Earth. None of the experts can tell which is which, because if you're standing on the beach looking at the ocean, it generally looks the same. And so if that's our main relationship with the ocean, we just don't really know what is the whole story.
Welcome to After the Fact. For the Pew Charitable Trusts, I'm Dan LeDuc. We're back with another installment of our series, From Lab to Life, where we explore the work of scientists who are improving the world through research and discovery. In this episode, we're talking about where our fish come from and the problem of overfishing. And here's a question you may have asked yourself. When buying fish at the market, how can you know it's sustainably sourced? Our guest is Grantly Galland, who supports Pew's work on fisheries around the world, promoting sustainability of fish stocks and the marine environment. And Grant says it can be almost impossible for consumers to know if they're buying sustainably sourced fish. You have to know the specific type of fish and where it was caught and what methods and what fishing equipment were used. And then, even if all the answers sound right, the fish could still be caught by an illegal fisher and you wouldn't know. But we do know that at least 1 in 5 fish caught in the global ocean is by illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. That's a big part of what Grant thinks about in his job, and he's here to tell us more. You have, I think, what could be one of the coolest jobs at Pew. You are deeply interested in fish and making sure they're sustainable and plentiful in the ocean, and you get to travel all over the world in the course of your work.
Yeah, absolutely. When I came to Pew first, it was to work on tuna conservation. And I mean, it's hard to believe that there are 10 or 12 people in the world working on tuna conservation. But you're right, it really is a cool job.
For people who don't know, what is the state of the fish population in the ocean?
The United Nations kind of tracks the status of fisheries around the world and releases a report every couple of years. Every one of those reports demonstrates that the picture is a little bit worse than the previous one. So we're still really good at catching and eating fish. We still need to get better at regulating the way that we do that. But there are hope spots as well, Dan, where we have some success stories where collapsed fisheries communities have been able to recover, where some stocks that have struggled from illegal fishing or overfishing now have those activities under control.
We're going to dive into the particulars of the work in a minute, but first, you started off studying science and biology and fish when you were quite young and came at it from the science side. Tell us about how you got started and ended up where you are.
You know, I was always really interested in nature and animals and fascinated by the ocean, like most kids. And in fact, I think just about every kid wants to be a marine biologist at some point, and I just sort of stuck to it and never grew up. But there is one other little wrinkle in the story is that my mom went to veterinary school and she got the call that she was going to vet school after being pregnant with me. I spent the first 4 years of my life running around vet school, in and out of classes, in and out of labs, engaging with the dairy cow that everybody knew. And one time walking around a corner and seeing this giant red-tailed hawk, which I thought must have been the biggest bird in the whole world. I always was around science, and that just kind of solidified very early on my interest in animals and nature. Combined with that, I had a dad who's like the prototypical outdoorsman. He would rather be fishing and hiking and canoeing than doing anything else. In fact, I'm the oldest of 3, and I'm a fish biologist. My sister is a fish biologist and a fishing guide. And my brother is a fishing guide and a fish artist. So we're 3 fish people.
Where in the world were you as you were growing up? Were you close to water?
Not super close. I lived in Georgia, and we spent, summers and spring breaks getting to Florida or Alabama or the Carolinas from inland Georgia or our own coast here in Georgia. And that just kept feeding this interest in what was going on under the big blue.
So after the master's degree, what was your first sort of work in this field?
Well, even before grad school, actually, I finished undergrad and I went off to do the Peace Corps. I thought this is something I always wanted to do, and I kind of stuck to it. The first thing I really stuck to was going to Peace Corps. I was in Belize. and living in communities where people really engage with the ocean. They rely on the ocean for food, for their employment, for driving tourism, for recreation and culture. And that really kind of solidified that I wanted to be as good of a scientist as I could be, but I also wanted my science to be applied to people problems, try to make the world a little bit of a better place, I guess, to say romantically. I went from Peace Corps off to grad school and then tried to become a good scientist and then moved over to Pew, where I really started working on science-based solutions to big problems. And somehow I'm 10 and a half years later.
Wow. I'm really curious about the indigenous communities in Belize and how they influenced your view of fishing. You got a perspective at a sort of formative time in your career.
In Belize, I was working for an organization that did environmental monitoring. We did national park protection, and I got the really fortunate situation to spend a lot of time in the water, counting fish, measuring corals, trying to understand what Belize's environment was like. And all the while, fishermen are all around. These are watermen and waterwomen in the truest sense. They live on the water. They get their food and their income from the water. It just made me realize that going off and studying genetics or studying ecology just for the pure sake of understanding the ocean might not be exactly what I wanted to do. And maybe instead I wanted to go and work on this thing called fisheries management, which is managing the activities of those canoes and sailboats in Belize waters, or in my case now, managing the activities of giant industrial purse seine vessels, long line vessels, fishing vessels that are spending 10 months at a time or more at sea taking fish. And that activity needs to be overseen by governments and by non-governments like us, so that we're not taking everything at once and instead are having long-term sustainability as our goals in those big fisheries. And so that's how I really got from fisheries and fish science to fisheries management, which is this overseeing of fishing activity.
Grant told us about how he works with regional fisheries management organizations, or RFMOs, made up of representatives from multiple countries to better understand what's happening in the water and how those organizations determine catch limits.
Now we've learned that we actually are capable of taking too many fish, and we need to be managing not just how to divide the pie, but we need to be talking about the size of the pie and make sure we're not taking too much. And so that's where science really comes into play, because who should catch what? That's a politics problem. But how much we should take, that's a scientific problem. And that's where people like me and organizations like Pew can come in and say what we understand is the most responsible way forward to promote sustainability. And they do that by, in some cases, they really do go out to count fish as they come back from a fishing trip, or go into the water to count fish that are still there and use that science to do their best estimate of how many fish are left and set management or policy to make sure that we don't take more than that.
And how do you know what's in the water? How do you know what's beneath those waves to know whether you're catching too much or not enough?
Typically, a big organization that's dealing with the whole Atlantic Ocean or the whole Pacific Ocean is a huge responsibility. They may be doing aerial surveys, which mean flying and counting schools of tuna, for example. They may be doing their own fishing surveys where they are scientists on scientific vessels replicating fishing and then counting how easy it is to catch them, how many they catch, etc., and just doing actual on-the-water science. And then thirdly, and maybe the most common way, is by having independent monitoring of fishing activity, where they have people who ride on the fishing boats and count the fish as they come on board. That's a great way to have a good understanding of what's happening. Unfortunately, most RFMOs only require that for 5% of the fishing vessels. So, the other 95, we're doing our best to make a good scientific guess of what's happening, but we only really know for about 5%. Some of the hope spots are happening out on the high seas, the areas in the Central Ocean beyond the reach of any one government. All the countries that are operating in that area need to collaborate together to manage those activities. And they're actually doing a little bit better on average than worldwide.
Most of us understand X number of miles off any coastline is that country's waters. But we reach a certain point where we're out in the middle of the ocean, the high seas. How do we govern those areas when no one nation is responsible?
The high seas is sort of a informal term for the formal term areas beyond national jurisdiction. And that's a very legalese term, but what does that mean? Well, we have areas within our national jurisdictions, the things that any one country is responsible for. Our lands, our national parks, our fresh water, and more than 200 miles from the coast starts the high seas, the areas beyond our national jurisdiction. And that continues all the way till the next 200 miles off the next coast. And it's a huge area. It's 50% of the planet, actually.
Wow.
Which people find hard to believe. 50% of the planet is in the high seas. And basically, to make decisions there, we have to collaborate internationally.
The first RFMOs started in the late 1800s when people were trading fur and hunting seals in the northern Pacific Ocean. In 1911, the North Pacific Fur Seal Treaty created a peaceful solution for countries to determine hunting limits. This not only helped prevent conflicts, but was a landmark for wildlife conservation. Then over the years, similar discussions started about cod and other fish.
Many RFMOs were founded at a time where we thought we didn't need to worry about how much fish is being caught. We just needed to worry about who should be allowed to catch it. And RFMOs were founded when they were trying to literally prevent armed conflict over fish and fishing in the high seas. And RFMOs are a way to promote peace, to prevent that by negotiating who should catch what based on history, based on geography.
Well, I understand the UN has its own fish treaty as well that is 30 years old this year. What does it do?
The UN has what's called the Fish Stocks Agreement, which the members have agreed that those fisheries targeting fish that swim inside and out of the high seas, or in other words, they're called transboundary because they're moving in and out of the areas under national jurisdiction and the high seas. All the members of that treaty have agreed to manage those fisheries sustainably. And where there is an RFMO, they should collaborate at the RFMO to do that. And where there is no RFMO, they should found one to do that.
RFMOs regulate the fisheries process as best they can, but we still know that there's a real problem with unregulated areas and illegal fishing that goes on. What is the state of this? It's called IUU fishing, right? Illegal, unregulated, and
unreported.
And unreported, yeah. None of those sound good.
That's right. No, they're not. And there has been quite a lot of progress to fight against illegal fishing. That's something that RFMOs have really done a good job, at least getting good policies in place. We probably need to do a better job enforcing those policies. However, unregulated fishing continues to be an issue because by definition, it's unregulated. It's not the responsibility of any RFMO. And so where that is happening, it's still an issue that the international community needs to address.
These meetings are, as I understand, are often closed, and yet organizations like Pew get to come. How do you get accredited to be there, and what is the role of an organization like Pew there?
Well, thank goodness that we are able to get accreditation to come because you're right, they are closed. And I believe you grew up as a newspaper reporter, right, Dan?
Yeah, I have a natural inclination against things being closed to the public view, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so you would never be allowed in one of these rooms. The press is not invited. Nothing is live streamed on the internet, which in this day and age is rare. These are private negotiations where government officials are deciding the fate of billions of dollars worth of fisheries. All the governments that have fishing vessels operating in the high seas sit around a big U-shaped table so everybody can sit at the front. Nobody ever has to sit behind another country. And they negotiate together on what they think is the best way forward for those fisheries. These RFMOs are based in the United Nations model, which has always been open to having participation of civil society. All the treaties that founded these international organizations include a paragraph that says organizations can be accredited to join such an organization as an observer. And Pew has done that. There are several others that have as well. And basically, we've written to the organization saying, we have expertise and interest in your business. We're coming here to participate in the process and provide science-based solutions to the problems you're trying to address.
So you're this neutral observer, the guy who's there to really discuss the science and the data. What are these meetings like behind closed doors? What are the dynamics of these meetings? Is it arguing? Is it thoughtful discussion? Is it occasional frustrations?
It's all of that. And I'm obviously biased as a nerdy fish guy, but yeah, they can absolutely be heated at times. Sometimes geopolitics enters the room for things that have nothing to do with fishing. For example, maybe one member of the group has invaded another member of the group for something that has nothing to do with fish. Or maybe they really are represented by the same people for 20 years who now might even consider themselves personal friends. And that's a way that they can get past some disagreements and reach a solution. But one thing about RFMOs is that they need to make unanimous decisions. If 53 individual governments are sitting around a table and needing to reach unanimous agreement, that is a big undertaking. It takes longer than we want. It might not be as strong as we want. But the good news is that these are legally binding decisions. When those 53 governments agree to something, they all have to go away and do it.
There are obviously going to be fish that have greater commercial value, tuna and others. But these fish all exist in this ecosystem with other species and other fish. So you start removing a lot of tuna. What does that mean for the rest of an ecosystem? And is that part of the equation? And does science help us there?
Absolutely, yes. This is a scientific question with scientific answers. So as we are removing fish from the ocean, we're impacting the whole ocean ecosystem. So if you take too many tuna, what does that mean? Well, something eats tuna, and tuna eats a whole lot of some things, and those parts of the ecosystem are now going to change. It's really hard, admittedly, to say we need to leave more tuna in the water because of this other thing that we're not catching. And so it's been difficult for fisheries managers, the policymakers making these decisions to do that. But it's absolute necessity because it's been proven time and time again that whole ecosystems are more resilient than broken ecosystems. If we're serious about having sustainable, resilient interactions with the ocean, we need to have whole ecosystems. We need to leave some fish in the water, not just for the next generation of fishers. We need to leave some fish in the water to preserve that whole food web, but also because they need to be supporting food webs for things like seabirds and whales that we care about for a different reason. So absolutely, we should be considering whole ecosystems, and that's where there's a lot of progress still to be made.
That sounds like a really tough one. When you start asking somebody, can you hold off because your fish actually eats this other fish that we care about?
Absolutely, extremely difficult problem. Imagine that you have a fishery where you've been fishing at a certain level for a long time, and unbeknownst to you, you have driven that fishery down near the point of collapse. Now you need to reduce your fishing pressure dramatically to recover that species. And then you have a scientist saying, well, actually, not only that, you need to reduce it even further because these seabirds and those whales and that swordfish eat this species as well. We often get a very stern look from managers when we say things like that because we're asking them to cut twice and they don't feel like they're in a position to cut twice. We have to remind the managers that they have a very broad constituency that includes more than the on-the-water fishers. They have people who like to eat fish. They have people who just like wildlife for nature's sake, and markets, buyers, retailers who are going to be the last person to sell you a fish before you eat it. We've recently been working to have more representatives of markets and retailers attend these meetings and participate in the process. Then we're trying to make sure that the people in the positions of power and positions to implement good policies consider the full range of their constituency when they make those decisions.
The people buying this fish and who want to make sure they're eating fish that's sustainable, is there anything you can recommend to people from that end of the assembly line of fish to consumer?
Sure, but I should start by saying it's really hard to make good decisions on seafood. Taking tuna, for example, most of us just think of this thing called tuna, and we're not thinking about the fact that there's 30 different species, and it comes from 4 different oceans, and it's fished by 5 or 6 different fishing gears. And each species, ocean, and gear combination is a different story of sustainability or not. I have a cousin visiting me, and last night he had the seared tuna, and it was delicious. And I had to bite my tongue before asking, well, what species was it and where did it come from? Because how would he know? So it's really hard. And an organization like Pew, our goal is to have every choice be a good choice. We want folks to be able to walk down the supermarket aisles or look over the restaurant menu, and whatever they choose, for whatever reason they choose it, it's a good choice from a sustainability perspective. And we have work to do to get there, but that's our goal. As far as what can consumers do, well, it's asking questions. It's kind of insisting that their representatives go to these meetings and make good choices. And beyond that, it's up to the government and the organizations in the room to do the right thing. I'm hopeful that this model of international collaboration, which seems to be recovering some fisheries that I thought would never be recovered, means that this is possible. And so there's always something more to do. Now we need to look to that next level to figure out how we protect whole ecosystems. And whatever the next difficult milestone is, it won't be impossible.
Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the show. Please leave us a brief review wherever you listen to podcasts, or email us at podcasts@pewtrusts.org. For the Pew Charitable Trusts, I'm Dan LeDuc, and this is After the Fact.